The sentence I will be analyzing today is on page 251 through 252, and I will be analyzing it through the use of figurative language. And the sentence is, I lost my sister Jeannie to my silence, and her pain and her despair, to both our angers and to a world's cruelty that destroys its own young in passing, not even as a rebel gesture, sacrifice, or hope for another living of the spirit, but out of not noticing or caring about the destruction. My thesis is that the use of imagery, personification, anaphora, oxymoron, juxtaposition, like all these things tie the reader to it with like our senses and stuff. We feel emotion, we feel pathos, like we can connect ethically about like suicide and death and how like silence really can actually be very detrimental. It doesn't have to be a rebel gesture or sacrifice, as she puts it, to cause someone's downfall. And I believe pulling out these figurative languages such as like imagery and stuff like that, it really helps connect the reader to the sentence and make it more of a reality for the reader. The figurative speech is what really stuck out to me, and imagery was one of them. And some imagery that really stuck out to me was the words destruction and destroyed, and you really get the denotation of destruction is more of like innocence and well-being within the sentence, but usually destruction's more like connotated with like physical and things. So it stuck out to me in the sense because it's not that, it's more denotated as more of like a feeling and well-being that's being destroyed. Also, the personification of the world's cruelty. One figure of speech that really stuck out to me was juxtaposition within the last part of the sentence, and this reads, not even as a rebel gesture or sacrifice or hope for another living of the spirit, but out of not noticing or caring about the destruction. And putting together the harshness of sacrifice and rebel gesture next to not noticing or not caring really pulls out like why Jeannie died. And I actually find it almost ironic that small things like silence, despair, and anger within two people are what ultimately caused something so detrimental. And as put by Lorde, it wasn't caused by a rebel gesture or sacrifice, and that's something that one would expect to be so detrimental to a person, but it was more the factor of silence that was the big thing. Anaphora was the next thing that really stuck out to me. I think the most is what made me choose this figurative language to analyze was the repetition of two. Like it says, I lost my sister Jeannie to my silence, and her pain and her despair, to both our angers and to a world's cruelty that destroys its own young in passing. And this, using anaphora in this sense, it had the effect of emphasizing why she lost her sister, and it emphasized like what she lost her sister to, making the impact of the sentence itself a lot more deep. And it's talking about like all these little factors that ultimately led to a detrimental end to Jeannie. A couple of oxymorons that stuck out to me too in the sentence was silence versus anger. Those were two things that led to Jeannie's downfall, but they're two opposing things. I feel like silence doesn't really express anger as much because anger is very driven and forward, and silence is disclosed and doesn't speak. And destroying versus silence, I feel a lot of people connotate like destroying very physical, very forceful, and silence is like laid back. Also a figurative language that is not necessarily part of the figure of speech, but what was pulled from this sentence was the abstraction of death. All the repetitions of the twos just points to like death, like this is what caused it, this is what caused it. It says, to my silence, her pain, her despair, to both angers, to a world's cruelty. And this sentence really pulls out like an abstraction of death. So these figurative like language really pulls the sentence together and just shows what a strong impact this death had.